So, your semester is coming to a close before you know it. You've been working hard in your public speaking class for weeks. The end is near. But then you get thrown a curveball. Your final presentation won't be in class in front of a live audience after all. Instead, you need to record a mediated presentation for delivery via online video. Ah! Nobody told me this would suddenly turn into a video production class! Well, the good news is that it's really not. At least not in the sense that you suddenly have to develop skills in advanced video editing and special effects. Because let's face it, these days, most everyone who finds themselves needing to prepare a mediated presentation is not a multimedia guru. The fact is, according to a Gallup report published in January of this year, the percentage of U.S. employees who work remotely in some capacity rose from 39% in 2012 to 43% in 2016. That's over 2 out of every 5 workers. And in that time, the amount of time spent working remotely rose 300%, according to Hickman and Robeson in 2020. That's 4 years before the COVID-19 pandemic, folks. So, if a professional career is what you want after graduation, developing skills in online work is crucial, and that includes being able to make a presentation using online video. I'll be totally honest with you. In my 28 years of teaching public speaking, I've never had to teach mediated presentation before this year. But I've been preparing online lecture videos for online teaching for the past 6 years, and so I can tell you this. What you need for successful mediated presentation is not a certificate in multimedia design, but a bit of creativity and a solid understanding of rhetorical principles for public speaking. Here's today's takeaway. An effective mediated presentation does not have to be technically flashy or advanced, as long as it's prepared and presented with effective public speaking principles. In the next few minutes, I want to share with you some important principles and practical tips for preparing and delivering effective mediated speech presentations. First, I'll discuss some basic concepts regarding the nature of mediated presentations. Next, I'll go over the relative advantages and drawbacks of mediated presentations. Finally, I'll address some broad best practices for presenting a speech via online video. So, to get started, we'll need to first nail down our primary point. What do we need to know about the nature of mediated presentations in order to understand our task? Mediated presentations can take a variety of forms, depending on the actual mode of presentation. Our good friends, public speaking professors Douglas Frawley and Joseph Tuman, remind us that mediated communication involves messages transmitted through either a mechanical or an electronic medium. Remember that a medium is essentially the use of some form of technology as a channel, a way to get a message from point A to point B, from speaker to audience. So when we're talking about online mediated communication, we're interested in using tools that will enable us to capture and send images and sound, all the stuff that makes up our speech, from our personal location to wherever our audience might be. The options for our medium of choice, as well as the benefits and drawbacks that come from them, depend in part on whether our presentation takes one of 2 basic forms: asynchronous presentation or synchronous presentation. Asynchronous presentation means that the participants, the speaker, and the audience members are not in the same place at the same time. So this kind of presentation involves the speaker pre-recording a message that the audience can receive at their own convenience. At this point, you're all probably familiar with the use of videos for lecture presentations or other forms of informational content, whether on YouTube or on a specialized platform like Panopto, which is what Mizzou uses for video lecture presentations by faculty like me. Many of you also listen to podcasts, which are also mediated presentations that usually rely on audio recording alone. Synchronous presentation means that all of the participants are experiencing the presentation in real time. While they're in the same time frame but different remote locations, the audience will receive the speech as the speaker presents it, essentially the same way that you would when listening to a speech in person. Since the COVID-19 pandemic started, most of you have probably gotten pretty cozy with Zoom, a video meeting platform that allows presenters to share their screens and can also record real-time presentations for later asynchronous enjoyment. So, with a better understanding of what's possible with mediated presentations, you as a speaker next need to think about the benefits and the shortcomings of presenting a speech online. Considering the advantages and drawbacks of mediated presentation is a must for any presenter preparing an online speech. So, why use mediated presentations? In 2020, the simple answer is because we often have to. Mediated presentations can provide some real advantages to speakers, though. Mediated presentations can provide flexibility, both in terms of the size of your audience and the time and place of presentation. In business terms, this can also mean big resource cost savings, according to Frawley and Tuman. If the presentation is asynchronous, then pre-recording means that you as a speaker have access to do-overs to get your intended delivery just right, and your audience can pause and rewind their speech as they like to better understand your message. Boy, what we wouldn't give to have those options in face-to-face speeches, right? If the presentation is synchronous, then these advantages are obviously unavailable, but they make audience feedback and interaction possible in ways that pre-recorded speeches can't. And with current tech, real-time presentations can easily become pre-recorded presentations for future viewing, so the speech won't ever be lost. Now, sounds great so far, right? Well, I'm sure you've noticed as consumers of mediated presentations these days that there are some definite drawbacks that speakers need to keep in mind and try to work around. First, a loss of some naturalness. We develop instinctive skills our entire lives for presenting and decoding subtle meanings in face-to-face interaction. Mediating that connection creates a distance that makes this more difficult. Even when video is available, some subtleties in nonverbal delivery can be lost. Second, and related to the first, is a loss of immediacy. The feeling of connection that provides a source of the energy and warmth in a face-to-face presentation can be lost over a distance, especially if the pre-recorded speech is presented for the first time to, well, no one. Third, some loss of nonverbal communication. The camera provides a serious constraint. It can only show your audience so much of your body, only just your talking head sometimes, unless you set it up on purpose to present more of your body. Expressive delivery through gestures and movement are possible, but far less so. Fourth, some loss of feedback. This is especially true if your presentation is pre-recorded. The nonverbal cues from listeners you can read and adapt to during a face-to-face speech just aren't there. And even during a synchronous Zoom presentation, there's a lot less to read, especially if listeners have their cameras turned off. No pressure here, but this is one of the things that your instructors are currently struggling with when they're lecturing to a bunch of blank squares. Fifth, audience distractions. At least during face-to-face speeches with a smaller audience, your listeners feel some social pressure to at least look like they're paying attention. But with remote distance, it's a lot easier for your audience to multitask and pay far less attention to you than to their Instagram. Finally, the dreaded technological difficulties. The entire presentation depends on your tech working the way that it should, and sometimes fate is cruel. Of course, difficulties caused by your lack of familiarity with the tech is far more preventable, which makes advanced preparation and rehearsal crucial. Okay, so mediated presentation opens up some helpful opportunities, but also introduces unique complications compared to presenting face-to-face speeches. Given these constraints, what can you do to maximize your effectiveness in mediated presentations? The good news is that effective mediated presentations basically just require modified approaches to familiar best practices for successful face-to-face public speaking. Our friends the classical rhetoricians in ancient Greece and Rome, particularly the Roman senator Cicero, developed the canons of rhetoric thousands of years ago. This semester we've discovered how the sequence of speech preparation still works pretty well today. These 5 stages of preparation still apply to mediated presentations: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. First, invention. According to Frawley and Tuman, it's the generation of ideas for use in a speech. You still need good content, and especially for a remotely presented speech, an even bigger emphasis on common ground and audience engagement. Frawley and Tuman make some specific recommendations in this area in their textbook. Direct personal references to your listeners is important. Try to reduce the distance between you by helping them connect to your content in terms of knowledge, experiences, and beliefs they already have. Asking rhetorical questions that invite your listeners to consider an idea works in a similar way. And of course, you can use inclusive second-person and third-person plural language like I'm doing right now by saying things like you and your and we and our instead of people or college students or society. Variety and concrete detail in your supporting material is also important. Factual information is great, but it can work so much better when you pair it with a descriptive example or a narrative anecdote. This kind of 1-2 punch, as I like to call it, engages audiences' imagination as well as their logical center. You're using your opportunities in the media to present the same idea in a couple of related, connected ways, and it can really work powerfully. Finally, simplicity helps keep your audience connected. Streamline the number of points in the speech, use a keep the best, dump the rest principle when selecting supporting evidence, and be sure to highlight key takeaway points for your listeners. After invention comes arrangement, a clear and intentionally structured organizational strategy for the speech. It's still important online, arguably even more so. And while PowerPoint slides are especially designed to structure a presentation visually, you don't need to rely solely on textual bullet point lists. Visual headings and captions, such as the ones I'm using in this presentation, can also provide helpful cues for your audience that can reinforce your topic sentences and transitions. The third canon of rhetoric is style, the way your content can be boosted with effective aesthetic choices. In other words, as Cicero observed thousands of years ago, while you don't want to sacrifice clarity and simplicity, you also want your content to move the audience. In other words, you want to do what you can to make your key content pop. Of course, providing concrete, vivid language in your descriptions and example support really helps to paint a mental picture in your audience's mind. Kind of like I did just now with the phrase, paint a mental picture. In addition, mediated presentations simply beg for visually engaging multimedia presentation aids. Pictures, video clips, colorful graphs and diagrams add more variety and dynamism to attract your audience's senses, even from a distance. The canon of memory involves the step of speech preparation. Of course, advanced preparation and rehearsal is always essential for any speech. For a mediated presentation, this involves a couple of specific strategies. First, practicing your delivery. Just because you're recording a speech which enables do-overs or the possibility of editing in post-production doesn't mean you want to spend the better part of your life doing do-over after do-over after do-over. Instead, rehearse speaking in front of a camera. Get a sense for how it feels. Record bits of speech practice to get a sense of your vocal and your nonverbal delivery in case you need to make adjustments. Second, practice your recording. Be sure to take enough time to familiarize yourself with the procedure of video capturing and saving. Do you know how to adjust your camera and sound settings? Do you know how to share your screen and use your presentation aid while screen sharing? Given the newness of this sort of presentation for most of you, recording and submitting your first draft probably isn't a good idea. Finally, we have the canon of delivery, your use of vocal and nonverbal presentation. Frawley and Tuman's recommendations in this area are really consistent with best practices for in-person speeches. First, your voice. Record a sample and check it. Is it sufficiently loud and clear? And be careful about your vocal speed. When speaking alone while recording, one of our natural impulses is often to speed up because we can't see if our listeners are actually following us. And another impulse is to use less energy and enthusiasm because it can feel weird to speak in an animated way when you're alone in your room. But you're not alone. Your audience is watching and listening, and unengaged monotones feel even worse when you're watching a video. Second, consider your eye contact. The upside is that our anxiety about looking people in the eye personally isn't there in a mediated speech. But the downside is you may not know where to actually look, right? The easy answer is look at the camera. Really. If possible, you might put your speaking script on the screen right under your camera. That's what I've done for this presentation. I'm using PowerPoint's presenter mode so that I have my script right out in front of me. You can't see that I've got my script, but it's right there. I promise, it's right there. Finally, there's the movement issue. You're behind a camera, which defines what the audience sees. It also defines your range of movement. So try some trial clip recording to see what works and what doesn't. And here's a tip. Watch some professional newscasters, talk show hosts, and YouTubers that deliver their messages while seated in front of a camera. You can get a sense of what kind of gestures might be most effective. So, while these tips are specific to recording a video presentation, the best practices ultimately aren't very different at all from how you want to apply the canons of invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery in any public speech. So, with this comforting thought in mind, let's wrap things up. As you can see by now, an effective mediated presentation does not have to be technically flashy or advanced as long as it's prepared and presented with effective public speaking principles. Looking at the basic definition of mediated communication, we know that whether your presentation will be asynchronous or synchronous makes a big difference in terms of your rhetorical choices. Mediated presentations, whatever the mode, are going to bring with them advantages you can leverage as well as drawbacks you have to take into account. Ultimately, while the medium is 21st century, the best practices are really centuries old. The classical canons of rhetoric provide us a helpful basis for considering specific strategies for effective mediated speeches. So why freak out? Constructing and presenting mediated speeches within the context of a public speaking class or other college classes gives you a great opportunity to develop crucial skills for the 21st century professional workplace, which can help you get and succeed in the job you want. Before you know it, you'll be able to prop up those feet and relax, knowing that you have the concepts and tools to be an excellent online communicator.